Hey guys, and welcome to another huge episode of Triggered. And today, we'll have one of your favorite guests on the show, Alex Marlow. He wrote Breaking the News, Breaking Biden, and is now out with Breaking the Law. We had him over the summer, but since then, his work seems to be more relevant now than ever before. He's the editor of Breitbart News, so we'll expose the apparatus behind all the coordinated hoaxes and corruption. We'll name names, we'll follow the money trail, and move our country one step closer to getting some real justice for those who deserve it. Because what the left is doing isn't just random chaos, guys. It's a coordinated lawfare machine built to destroy the values that made this nation great. So I'll get into all of that with Alex Marlow in just moments. But make sure you guys are liking, sharing, subscribing so you never miss one of these major episodes. Remember, if you miss the show here on Rumble, go over to Apple, Spotify podcasts. If your friends get their podcast that way, we need you guys to share it. We got to get this messaging out there. You're not going to get this stuff from the fake news, obviously. You guys are a part of that, so get it out there. For all of the top headlines that we cover on the show, go over to my news app, MXM News, like minute by minute, MXM, Mike, X-Ray, Mike, where you can get the mainstream news without the mainstream bias. And of course, don't forget about our brave sponsors for having the guts to support this program. And also, guys, don't forget about the Birch Gold Group, where you can diversify your savings and protect your future. The Trump administration is moving fast to right all of the left's wrongs. But with all the damage we've seen the Democrats do, it's always smart to be prepared. And that's why thousands of Americans are buying gold now from the Birch Gold Group. Here are the facts. In the past 12 months, the value of gold has increased by 30%. And Birch Gold makes it extremely easy to convert an existing IRA or 401k into a tax-sheltered IRA in physical gold. Or you can even buy some gold to store in your home safe. Just text my name, Don Jr., D-O-N-J-R, to the number 989898, and Birch Gold will send you a free info kit on gold. There's no obligation, only useful information. It's about learning more and educating yourself. With an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau and tens of thousands of happy customers, take control of protecting your savings today. Again, text my name, Don Jr., D-O-N-J-R, to the number 989898. Guys, joining me now, author of the book, Breaking the Law, Breitbart News Editor-in-Chief, Alex Marlow. Alex, awesome to have you back as always.
Yeah, Don, always nice to be with you. Happy Thanksgiving to you and your audience.
Likewise. Hopefully you guys had a good one. We're getting into the Christmas season now, so it's exciting. It's nice to be able to actually say that again instead of the holiday season. Sometimes I slip up. It's still the years of New York, despite avoiding it. There was no such thing as a Christmas party for a few years, but it seems like that's back. So probably a good thing.
Well, we're actually at the point now. It's kind of like with the mask people, where I always kind of like the last few people who hung on to their mask, because then I knew exactly who I wouldn't want to talk to and spend time with. That's what the people who are still saying happy holidays and putting up holiday lights and holiday displays now I know exactly who I don't want to talk to, because if you're still doing that, you missed the boat, and you and I are not going to connect at all. So
it's almost like honestly, it's almost like we're seeing a little resurgence of gay and retarded coming back into common vernacular. And I know that growing up for me, I know it's not popular, you're not allowed to say this anymore, but I know growing up, I'd say the words gay and retarded combined made up about 50% of my high school vernacular, like in terms of overall word count, because it was everything. Like it's what you used. And then it became a cancelable offense, almost, borderline, capital punishment. I guess I was one of the early people to bring it back a couple of years ago, almost by accident, because it was just, again, one of those rote things that I just said. And I was like, oh God. And then I was like, oh, wow, my world didn't end. And then we saw the president of the United States a couple days ago, dropping it about Tim Walz, which is, by the way, not an inaccurate assessment. You got one or two people coming up, and obviously no one ever used those things in terms of, about people with disabilities. It was just a word as a descriptor for someone being
dumb,
gay, or retarded.
Yeah, right. And I love when your father he was gaggling and someone brought it up and said, are you sure you stand by that? And he said, I've really given this a lot of thought, And yeah, he's retarded. It was just so great because this is part of where I've been very blessed as being editor-in-chief of Breitbart is that I've got to say gay and retarded. It's the not publicly because I don't like to get canceled for unnecessary reasons, but privately I've got to say gay and retarded for years. And one of my authors, John Nolte, uses gay all the time in his writing, and I've never censored it one time. And but it's fun to see people come back around. I did have one holdout. I won't name her because she's a wonderful reporter, but one of my editors did not like when I would use the word retarded, which I would use quite a bit, and even she used the word retarded recently. And wow. I just we're so back now.
We're back, baby. We're back. I mean, so we should have never been gone, but that's not how it works.
Exactly. But I've never been gone. It's one of these things where just to watch the people start realizing how insane the trans stuff was. I feel so blessed that I never had to do any of that. I never need to have. There was no pronoun discussions. There was no we're calling Caitlyn Jenner she. Like that never came up in the Breitbart newsroom. We never had to deal with that. And so many normal people are forced to deal with these completely insane distractions for the last decade or more. And we just have to stop it. And next time, let's just be faster. Let's just be faster when people are saying you can't say gay. When we're not trying to attack gay people. In fact, I know a lot of gay people. I grew up
in New York City. Like half the people I knew growing up were gay. Like it's not an attack on them. Like it's ridiculous.
Of course not. And it catches you. And when you say someone's being gay, it just makes you stop and think like, am I being gay? I don't want to do that. And it really works as an insult, and it's not an attack on gay. Everyone knows this. The same thing calling someone retarded. It doesn't mean we're making fun of the mentally ill. I'll tell you, I've got some friends who are slow, and I will tell you, I would never insult them by comparing them to Tim Walz. Like they're much better and much smarter than Tim
Without
Walz.
question.
I mean, he's way more retarded than they are.
Yeah. Listen, I went through it myself, right? I was a real estate guy from New York City, and I was like, wait a second. When that stuff started happening, I'm like, well, we're sort of appealing to all sides. And just like, I like being able to speak, when I'm not sort of constantly checking myself. And so, I guess I probably got ahead of that curve a little bit and was willing to do that and take some of those hits a little bit because I basically gave up on this notion that, we're not a totally bifurcated thing. And, I said, in our business, I said, hey, half those people are never coming back to us. So I'd rather be, looked at as a legend to this half, right. Rather than agnostic to the whole. A legend to half is much better than just sort of indifferent to everyone. And, that wasn't easy to do as a business guy when you're like, your whole market just cut in half. Like that's challenging. But, once you actually stood for something, it's amazing how many people sort of backed you and sort of that following became much stronger, even if it was, a much smaller pie.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just like if your dad equivocated on the word retarded, and if he said something like, well, I understand that some people find it offensive, and I'm not one of those people. And I understand that a lot of people go through hardship, but it wasn't so bad what I said. It wouldn't have satisfied anyone. No one would have been happy with it.
Well, and by the way, worse than that, the equivocation is just the admittance that you were wrong, and that's when the attack starts. When you do the pullback, you actually get nothing out of the apology, right? Even if it's sincere, even if it was a mistake, you get nothing from it. That's just their opening to attack further. When you don't give them that opening, it just sort of ends there because they're like, well, we got nothing. We can't run with it. They'll create the drama in their own little bubble, but no one actually cares.
This is where I was very grateful for the Access Hollywood tape. And I was one of the few people who, when it came out, said it's not going to move a single vote. Because I knew that your dad's voters were voting for him because they thought the immigration problem was a crisis. Hillary was deeply corrupt. We need to rip up NAFTA and come up with something new. And the establishment media was the devil. And that's why they were voting for him. And they didn't care about that tape. Yeah. And I'm really glad about it because it just reminded you that you can say stuff. And that's not, you wouldn't say in front of the Queen of England at a state dinner. Yeah. And it's not the end of the world. And that moment was so big because it showed as a people that we're not just gonna cancel people for using one word they don't like.
Yeah.
And it's just great. And it's delight. And we owe your dad 100% for this. President Trump gets full credit for this.
Well, by the way, I remember that day vividly with the Access Hollywood tape. I was there, and it was, me, the whole family, and you had Reince Priebus, Steve Bannon was there, and, it was like a, 6 a.m. in the morning meeting in Trump Tower, like, oh my God, this thing came up. And like, a lot of the political experts in the room were like, oh my God, you got to go do the apology. You got to do this. There were people being like, you should just, I think it may have been Reince Priebus at the time that just like, okay, you should just quit now. And, or you're going to lose in the greatest landslide in the history. It was like, I was like, we got like 3 weeks to go. So Steve and I were the only two people in that room at the time. Like, are you out of your mind? Like at this point, like,
no.
Maybe we lose, but we're not going down as pussies. Like we're going to fucking fight. We're going to go all in. And no, I remember it. Steve and I were like, looked at each other in the eye, and we were the only ones being like, are you out of, this is even before DJT chimed in. He was sort of listening to everyone, and he ultimately agreed with us. And I think he would have gotten there probably without us, just based on everything we know about him in general. But I remember that morning, and everyone's like, you should just drop out now. Like, it's like, well, isn't that also the biggest loss in the history of presidential elections? And Steve and I were like, we just got to go in it. But I'm not going to say I wasn't somewhat like demoralized, because all of the work that we put in, all of this. And I remember it was that Monday. I think I went to Iowa, and I gave a speech, and I'm going to say it was probably one of my, I'm not exactly known to be like a low energy kind of guy, and I probably was up there like Jeb. And I was, a little bit, low energy Jeb, exclamation point, limp. And I remember getting off the stage, and a group of like 5 ladies, and these were like, evangelical Christian right, like ladies, grabbed me, and I was, taking a couple selfies, and one of them comes up to me, and he's like, Sugar, I see you're a little bit down, but my girlfriends and I had that conversation 17 times last month.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, like, I knew we had to keep going. I was never going to stop. But even me in the back of my head was like, man, the media spin. Like, you watch enough of the negative nonsense and you listen to the narrative enough and you like start believing some of it, even if you know it's nonsense. And I was like, oh, like no one cares. No one cares.
Yeah.
It didn't change a single vote.
Yeah. But first of all, you're allowed just to talk in private. And second of all, what he said was objectively true, and the people don't talk about this. Like, if you actually listen to the full context, and maybe you object to the language, but of course, that's the reputation, is that when you're a star, people let you do certain things. It wasn't false what he was saying. And then the media overplayed it. They acted like, and the conservative establishment was like this too. I forget if it was Priebus or if it was Paul Ryan, but one of the other, I remember hearing what you heard, which is, Like we need to let's just drop out. I mean, we're going to lose.
Yeah, well, Paul Ryan said it publicly, I think. Priebus was just sort of in public, like, this is going to be a landslide. Because, again, it probably had the mindset, he was good at a lot of things, but, like, that establishment side could not even fathom that you could actually have a conversation that, and then, when, we collectively kind of coined that term locker room talk, it's like, that's what it was. Like,
that's what it was.
I've had conversations I wouldn't want to read on the front page of the New York Times.
Of course not.
Doesn't mean I believe it. Doesn't mean I would act it out. But it's like, dudes being dudes and women being women, oftentimes the women are worse than the men. This stuff actually happens in real life, and to pretend that they don't is nonsensical.
Look, it's and I feel very happy to speak on this because I married my high school sweetheart. We met when we were 17 years old. We have 4 children. I'm in a very traditional sort of marriage and relationship, and it's the people are way too preoccupied in trying to bust people for sexual sins and stuff, and trying to just get people on these things, and to feel like that means that we're now going to support Hillary Clinton all of a sudden because Trump said something to Billy Bush.
I'll send myself to the gulags out of principle. I'm like, I don't know, probably not.
What are you talking about? That's completely absurd. And so, but anyway, I just, to go back to the conversation of the moment, which is that we're taking back the words gay and retard. I think it all stemmed from that moment. And that's why that election was so important and so historic. And I know that the president and his team are getting done a lot more at a much quicker clip, this administration, than the first one. But that was still just be able to take out all of those sacred cows, the left's ability to police our language and stuff. It just continues to bear fruit. And today it's that we can say retard again.
Well, it's good because I think there's a lot of things that kind of become more and more relevant every day. When we last spoke, we were talking about your book, Breaking the Law, becoming sort of an instant bestseller when it dropped back in August, I believe it was. And again, I think it feels more relevant by the day. How did you approach putting that book together? And I guess, big picture, how should we view that and unveil that, over the summer and, bring it into the context of today.
Yeah, thank you. And you guys have been kind and supportive, and your whole family, your dad's on the cover. He endorsed it right away, and he was very helpful, gave me some interviews for it. And it is relevant because these investigations into the bad guys who tried to bankrupt your family, put them behind bars, put you behind bars, your brother. It was the whole goal is to make sure that you guys cannot practice your craft, apply your craft in business, and that really to subvert our democracy so that they would hijack the election by putting Trump in jail, either bankrupting him so he couldn't campaign, or worst case scenario, forcing him to campaign from a courthouse, which you would think any other human being on earth wouldn't be able to win an election doing that. Your dad could, unbelievably. But we're going to keep seeing these stories pop up because there are investigations ongoing into the people who were part of the lawfare superstructure that sought to destroy your family. And I wrote at the conclusion of the Fani Willis chapter about how that case should have been thrown out a long time ago. But I wrote, but that's okay, because eventually it will get thrown out completely. And then that will be a good day for President Trump, and he's going to get a news cycle out of it. And that's what happened last week, where the case finally completely got dismissed. That case was completely absurd start to finish, that even the biggest champions of lawfare, like Andrew Weissman, who's the main spokesperson for it on MSNBC, even he was saying, this one's not going to work out. This is not going well
for those of you who don't remember, Andrew Weissman was the leader of Russia, the guy trying to throw me in jail for years during the first term. So I guess I'd ask, because, you got midterms coming up in a year. It feels like we're already in another election cycle. Historically speaking, the incumbent doesn't do all that well in that. Does any of this ever stop? Because, I'm sort of just getting ready for, hey, come, next January, not this coming January, but the following, once, if the Democrats take over the House, it's just going to be a rinse and a repeat of the same nonsense. I don't think anything comes from any of it, but like you also, the problem with Fani Willis, you were right. It may be a decent news cycle for Trump, but you also still had to spend, hundreds of millions of dollars fighting this lawfare. There's no accountability for that. It's not like, oh, you get your money back. You waste time, money, energy, and that's what Russia was. It was just to slow down his agenda. If he has to focus on not getting thrown in jail or his family not getting thrown in jail and spend money doing that and focus energy on that, you can't implement the things you want to do to actually make America great again.
Yeah, that's correct. And that's the whole point of why this is a subversion of democracy and why the left talks about insurrection. I think all this is insurrection. I think all of it is the trying to make it so that Donald Trump couldn't govern in his first term because of the Russia hoax. All that was designed to take up time, resources, and his concentration, his ability to try to implement an agenda. That's what that was about. Then they tried to completely destroy him every possible way via bankruptcy, jail, and then even try to murder him during the interim of the two terms. And then now they're going to try the same stuff. If the midterms don't go well, they're going to it's just going to be impeachment bonanza the last 2 years of his administration. And what these judges are doing, Boasberg, of course, plays in the book in a big way, but there's dozens and dozens of justices and judges throughout the courts, throughout the country, who are trying to stop Trump's agenda and just get things clogged up in the court so that 30-40% of the agenda just gets stopped. And then it's got to go through the litigation process. And then a lot of it will be allowed to continue, but all they're doing is trying to put on the brakes, slow momentum. Your family understands that politics is got a lot of momentum to it, and it's the victory begets victory, and they want to stop that. They want to start making victories into losses, and that's the whole playbook. It's very nuanced. It's very well funded. They're very organized, and understanding how the lawfare superstructure works is essential because that's the main resistance. You see how pathetic the Democrats are. They're calling for sedition, basically. I mean, calling for coups, military coups. Now that's what they're doing. They have nothing. They have no arguments. And all they can do is flail around, aside from the lawfare justices and judges who are being able to get some scalps.
Yeah, and I think if you combine that with narrative, I see so much of that actually going on as well, which is like, let's take the narrative of inflation. So I think the inflation numbers are back in check where they need to be, but it doesn't eliminate the 4 years of gross inflation where prices went up. They're like, well, it's Trump. It's like, well, no. Unless you ran like negative 20% inflation right now, it's hard to get prices back. So the affordability crisis isn't Trump. He got inflation back down to check, but it's hard to go back 4 years and run negative numbers when, the price of goods went up so much somewhere else. You could stop him from going up 10, 15% a year going forward. But it's really hard to get negative inflation. I mean, we haven't had that in forever, in my lifetime certainly, where you could go negative so much to undo basically the doubling of prices for 4 years under Biden. That's all him, and yet they try to say, well, everything's still too expensive under Trump. It's like, well, that's not because of Trump. He's got a lot of that under control, but to go negative is almost impossible, and it's a really difficult task to actually achieve.
Yeah, it is. And I was looking at this about Black Friday spending surging past forecasts. We have a big report on this at Breitbart News, 4.1% rise, which is really big. Holiday season shopping beginning with inflation at the lowest since 2020 for core inflation. Inflation has come down quite a bit. And I'll tell you, I got on my podcast, I had a 45-minute interview with Secretary Bessent, Treasury Secretary, and he thinks inflation is going to completely is going to go potentially to zero next year. He thinks it's going to be a huge year for decline in inflation. And a lot of this has to do with the tariffs, which we were told the tariffs are going to cause inflation. No, the opposite is happening. It could end up reducing inflation. There'll be no apologies for this. No one's going to take it back. Those of us who were skeptical of the tariffs, of course I wasn't. I'm sure you weren't either. But there's so few of us, even on the right, who were saying, we need to do these tariffs. This is going to rebalance the scales. We're getting raw deals here. We need to stop it. And your dad fought through so much noise on that, so much noise, even amongst Republicans and conservatives on that. And so there's so much positive data. It's not all positive. There's some cost of living issues, affordability issues we really need to take on in a major way. But, apartment rent is down. There's so many things that are actually going decently. It's just the media is always just going to cherry pick the worst stats, and that's what you're going to see in the front pages.
Yeah, I mean, in Breaking the Law, you connect the dots again between sort of the media, the political establishment, and really the courts, all functioning as an arm of the radical left. Now that we're into nearly a year into the second term, we've seen the Georgia case dismissed, the federal cases evaporated, Fani Willis literally disqualified. What's your assessment of the state of the corrupt lawfare superstructure? What's their next move ultimately? Do they just keep doing it and saying, hey, you know what, if we can slow him down, if we can just keep his mind off of other things, that's good enough for now? I don't think anyone's buying into it the way they did probably the first term, but what do you think happens next?
Yeah, this is really important here because there's a lot of people, Don, who I think are kind of doomering online. And I think it's a small group, but I think they're getting elevated by various algorithms. And I think that there's, some foreign bots who are amplifying this. But there's a lot of people who are acting as though things aren't good enough. They're too disappointed in something. And thus it's fair game to check out. The only way to stop the lawfare superstructure definitively, the only way to stop it is to win elections. It's the only way. That's how these judges get they get picked, they get elected, or they get appointed by people who've been elected. It's the only way to stop them. And this is one of the things that during the Biden years, with Joe Biden should not have won that election. I know that a lot of people think he didn't win that election. He was able to appoint with Chuck Schumer all of these judges and justices throughout the country, continuing to rack up the potential to block parts of the agenda. And the only way out of this is to win. So we have to win all of these races. Sure, we could try some impeachments if they're going to be effective, but that takes a lot of political capital. And if they don't work, then it wastes a lot of time. So I'm not a huge, we should impeach all the judges we don't like guy. The only way to win long-term is to stay engaged and focus in off-year elections, in down-ballot elections. And that is a hard path, but it is the only path to stop them. And if you see something where you get fed up because some part of the agenda that you liked is getting blocked by some know-nothing judge you've never heard of, and it shouldn't be, there's only one solution. We have to win more. Yeah.
What do you make of, I thought it was sort of interesting, in the last 2 weeks, you had X sort of showing where people are actually posting from. And you realize that, a lot of the accounts that, tend to get stuff to go viral have either, fairly large followings. Now, some of them are probably through VPNs, and so maybe that's why they're showing up abroad. But you could also see a lot of it was clearly just, essentially a foreign influence op going around in social media by a lot of accounts that probably even you and I had followed for years. You realize they're just on the payroll working for someone else. What do you make of all of that?
Yeah, it's very clear that whatever's happening online is trying to amplify division on the right. This is another weapon the left has right now. And I think a lot of people who are genuinely disappointed in certain parts of the agenda, maybe they're not committed to the president's coalition, and it's being used to manipulate the public to think that things are going worse than they are with the agenda. And I'm not saying that everyone should be satisfied. You should never be satisfied. You should always demand more from your leaders. But overall, that we've seen a lot of progress that would have been unthinkable in any other administration. And yet you go online and you see all of a sudden that MAGA is dead or something. And a lot of these people are clearly the foreign bot accounts. And they see that aside from these lawfare judges blocking Trump's executive actions, things like that, the other thing that they have that's powerful is you're trying to drive a wedge to break up our coalition. And that's very effective if they can do that, because one of our biggest enemies right now is apathy. We have a lot of low propensity voters showed up and voted when President Trump was on the ballot. He's not going to be on the ballot in Tennessee this week. He's not going to be on the ballot in the midterms next time, but he is in a way because his agenda is going to get completely shut down. But people need to understand that if you're not supporting the people who support the president's agenda, then you're not supporting the president. And until people get that, the left is going to have an opportunity to beat us.
But I don't think it's just the left either, though. I think there's definitely an element of con Inc., meaning neocon conservatism, never-ending war conservatism, ship your jobs and your American dream to China conservatism. I see that as being sort of an unholy alliance as well. Those guys, I think they're viewing this as their only chance, probably in this century, to ever try to bring back that side of the Republican Party. I think it's dead, but they're certainly relishing at this. I mean, it definitely seems to me like this is largely an attack, not just on the MAGA America First agenda, but also on J.D. Vance, someone who could be a successor to that and will continue to run with that agenda, as opposed to going back to the good old ways of republicanism, where it's about the billionaire donor class, it's about no one else. And I think that's an important thing to discuss. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, you make an important point. I agree with this completely. There are certainly people in the establishment of the Republican Party who would like to see a return to the old ways of the Republican Party, and they see fissures in the MAGA coalition as a way to get there. Because as of now, if we had the election today, J.D. Vance, if he said that I'm picking Marco Rubio as my vice president, it'd be basically a coronation. Like, he would skate through, there'd be almost no primary, he'd vanquish everyone. But they could see that over a 3-year horizon, that if you divide MAGA enough, then all of a sudden you could see an establishment Republican perhaps contend for a nomination. And that's going to be very tempting to people who have always hated Donald Trump and have always hated parts of the MAGA movement. They don't like that he's been right about certain things like endless wars and trade and things where the Republican establishment's been horrible on them over the last few decades. They haven't accepted that they were wrong, and they have cognitive dissonance on that front. And they would love to see an establishmentarian or someone at least more sympathetic to the establishment get nominated, not J.D. Vance. So they're going to, at a minimum, sit on their hands as some of these fights play out. And so that's why we need to be aware that this is happening. We need to identify who the people are who are trying to see the fissures happen. But then also it's important that there's red meat being tossed to new members of Trump's coalition. Let's get the investigations going. I've got a huge list of all the lawfare investigations that should take place. I love that Tish James and Jack Smith are under investigation. But let's add Fonnie Willis in there. Let's add Lewis Kaplan, who is the judge in the insane E. Jean Carroll case. Let's add Andrew Weissman in there. Let's add Allison Greenfield, who was your dad called Chuck Schumer's girlfriend, who was Arthur Engeron's top clerk. Let's start bringing these people in. Joe Biden, Hunter Biden. Let's get all these people going. Let's nullify some of the auto pen stuff. Let's throw the red meat out there too. But understand that trying to divide the MAGA coalition is what the left and the establishment can agree on could really hurt us in the next 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, and I mean, from the left, we're seeing even more of that. I mean, we're seeing some of this with the Seditious Six, and essentially calls for the U.S. military to disobey orders. I mean, talk about insurrection. I mean, I can't, they love using words. I'm like, I'm not quite sure you know what that means, because, they're doing it themselves. But Democrats don't want, tough actions against narco-terrorists. They don't want any of that. But, they were more than happy to throw your grandmother, who was within 1,500 miles of D.C. on January 6th in jail without due process. Why is that? Why is the narco-terrorist thing their red line? Why will they, go out there and, commit what I believe to be sedition to defend narco terrorists. It doesn't, like some of the things, at least I don't agree with them, but at least I understand what their end game is. Here, I'm not exactly sure what it is.
Yeah, I don't know either. This is really heavy Kilmar Abrego Garcia vibes for me, where it feels like one where they feel like they got us on this, and I just don't. I feel like this is gonna backfire, but they think that they've got some sort of technicality that we need to get approval for Congress for blowing up ships, and so long as we're not accidentally blowing up fishing boats, which I got to tell you, we read Venezuelan media at Breitbart. I have nothing to suggest that any of this that we're doing anything other than blowing up literal drug ships.
Well, I got a more pragmatic approach to it. When you see out of Venezuela, this isn't Miami during Yacht Week or whatever it is. Like, you don't have go fast boats running quad 450s. You know what I mean? Like, right. They don't fish with that in Venezuela. Okay, they get in Miami where the per capita income's a lot higher and you got a lot of millionaires and billionaires. I can see that. But a go fast boat with 400 or 450 Mercs on the back of it, like that's $1 million boat. Like, that doesn't, that's not a Venezuelan fishing boat. There's no fishing boat in Venezuela that expensive. And yet, there's dozens of them running out of there, with blue barrels. Like, that's not chum. That's not bait. There's no rods and there's no nets. Like, it's pretty clear what these things are. And yet they pretend like it's not the case.
So something crossed my mind because these boats look and behave differently than fishing boats. The locals are all saying they're drug boats. The beloved intel community probably provided some of the intel so we know these are drug boats. So I thought the left loves the intel community. So they're the ones who are probably feeding us a lot of this information. We don't see any fishermen being targeted at this point, and yet the Pentagon isn't being entirely forthcoming about what's going on. And that makes me think that maybe they've set a trap. Maybe they're intentionally not saying a lot because maybe one day that they'll divulge more information, how they know, how they're operating so efficiently. And in the meantime, your dad gets to have these great sound bites. He's like, we're going to kill him. Dead. They're going to be dead. We're going to kill him. And yes, exactly. That's what we want. Is it anyone that stops? How many fentanyl deaths do we have in this country every year?
100,000.
100,000?
That's two Vietnams. I always say it because it's like it just puts the whole issue, because like everyone knows someone, but like maybe I just happen. Everyone has one degree of connection to someone who's died from fentanyl or a friend of or whatever it may be.
Sure.
But like, when you think about 100,000 deaths, 2 Vietnams a year, I mean, I think that just puts such perspective on the problem. I mean,
Of course it does. And so we're going to, I'll tell you, I hope it doesn't happen. But I mean, if we accidentally took out one fishing boat because we're trying to stop 100,000 American deaths, like this is the trap that I feel like the Trump administration is setting, that this has got to be a 97.3 issue, right? I mean, it's who wants us not to bomb drugs that are coming in to kill our country? Clearly, there are technicalities to suggest that this is absolutely the perfect use of our fighting forces. What's the point of fighting forces if we're supposed to allow drug boats to come and deliver chemicals that are going to destroy Americans' lives and communities? It's just common sense logic here. And so that's why I feel like this is a trap that is going to backfire on the people who are wringing their hands over it.
I would think so, because again, no one wants never-ending wars or any of this. But if you send one $20,000 missile and you can save 10,000 lives, 100,000 lives over the year, you spend $1 million to do that. I like that a lot better than spending trillions of dollars in the Middle East or in Ukraine. And in terms of a clear and present danger to the citizenry of the United States, that's a good bang for the buck, no pun intended.
Yeah, and I guess the point, just to be, I think, respectful of some people in the audience who are probably afraid of us doing regime change in Venezuela. I don't think that's what President Trump wants to do. I have seen no evidence he wants to do regime change anywhere, really. I think he likes to be unpredictable and surprising to people. Yeah. And I don't think that there's a really clear path to do that. And so he could do it. He likes to, I think, move quickly and get victories. I don't think he likes prolonged struggles, which I think all the evidence suggests that that's what it would be like in Venezuela. So I don't want to see that happen. I'm hoping that's not what's going to happen, but I'm cautious of it. I'm trying to keep an eye on that, but I just don't see it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, immigration is really at the center of all of this, right? The refugees aren't vetted. We saw that last week in D.C. We had Maduro emptying prisons under Biden. These are facts. We had, obviously, the Afghan disaster. It really feels like one of the biggest acts of evil and corruption against the United States that we've ever seen, and it's taking American lives. how do we as a nation reckon with all of that? I mean, it's imagine, an elected body that seems to be working in exactly the opposite of the best interests of its citizens.
That's exactly right. And so I feel like what's the point of government? Isn't the point of government to benefit citizens, to keep us secure? And what's the point of an executive branch and a Department of War if we don't have the ability to do these things from time to time, when it's very clear that people are consistently doing us harm and intentionally doing us harm and are leaving Americans vulnerable on a daily basis? And so long as the border's been open, so long as we've been seeing, this horrific story about the National Guardsmen who were shot upon by an alien who had come here, welcomed by the Biden administration, not vetted through a program where we at the time at Breitbart were complaining, we're not vetting these people. We did, everyone who gave us, a one piece of intel during a botched war that we did not win in Afghanistan, that does not give you a right to be an American forever. And then we're not enforcing the visas, and then Americans are getting killed. We need a hard reset on the way we treat immigration in this country. And hopefully these news stories of late are allowing us to speak more plainly about this. And I think we are.
Yeah, I mean, you really almost have to ask yourself about the corrupt channels of influence with the cartel specifically. I mean, we've seen a couple recent reports on how left-wing groups here in America were actually being funded by Latin American communists. I mean, it feels like we're over the target on something very deep and very disturbing here. I know your book sort of lifts the curtain on some of those funding mechanisms, but can you elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that's noteworthy is that we see a lot of following the money. A lot of people want to see chaos and division in this country. And there's all sorts of people who don't share our same aspirations in terms of global security and the global world order that has America at the top. And a lot of people who are on the left and don't like the Trump way of doing things. So we're constantly following the money at Breitbart to see who's funding certain things. And you always have to look at foreign powers, and you always have to look at the billionaire class and where they're spreading their money around. And in the case of lawfare, you see repeatedly over and over again, names pop up who are funding the lawfare superstructure to make it very lucrative to try to ruin your family's lives and try to make it so that, more importantly, conservatives can't get good representation, that you can't get good attorneys, you can't get high quality people who are not super brave to be able to represent your businesses and when you go to trial. And so a lot of names are familiar. Reid Hoffman, another guy who should be investigated, who is close Biden ally, and funds all sorts of horrible things. Lorene Powell Jobs, who's been featured in all my books. Steve Jobs' widow, who funds The Atlantic, but also all sorts of wild left-wing fake news entities online, close friends with Kamala Harris. But then you see people like the Sandler Foundation, which I wasn't super familiar with the Sandler Foundation, but they have this thing called ProPublica, which you've heard of, which does some reporting, but all of it's very targeted. They're trying to ruin the lives of Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito, the two most stalwart defenders of our Constitution, bar none, in the country. And all they do is try to dig up dirt to try to make their lives miserable. And it's all guilt by association tactics. They never find anything that's actually improper or illegal they do. They just do a harassment campaign. So they'll do whatever they can. Can they get you disbarred? They'll try that. Can they bankrupt you? They'll try that. Can they just give you a hard time? They'll try that. And that's how they do it when it comes to lawfare, but it's top to bottom throughout the government. So following the money has always been our tried and true tactic at Breitbart.
So, I mean, you're from Los Angeles. So, from Proposition 50 and the redistricting wars to Newsom's former chief of staff getting indicted on corruption charges to the state insurance commissioner embroiled in really, like one scandal after another, all on the taxpayer dime. What is it about the California political machine that keeps producing this cast of characters?
Yeah, it's a one-party town, and it's run by the Democrat machine, which is a left-wing entity. There's no real opposition. Republicans are just, we've never been organized. It's been painful. I was in college Republicans 20 years ago, and it was really depressing then and has not improved since. And if you wonder why we produce such bad politicians, is they're not contested. I mean, our Congress is a supermajority Democrat. So all it is a race to the left. And if you understand the left, you understand that for them, politics is above all else. It is the most important thing in their life. It, more than God, more than family, more than duty, more than honor.
By the way, it is their God. It's their religion. Leftism is their religion.
Yeah, and I look at it, if you see a lot of your favorite, conservative commentators bio, it's probably going to say that, it'll list their faith and it'll list their family, and then it's their work. Then that's what they care about. That's not how it is on the left. So they don't care if you cheat and lie and steal, so long as you're a dependable left-wing vote. If you have a history of voting left, of moving things leftward in this state, then you're going to continue to get support. And the only time you run afoul of the machine is when you start taking conservatives seriously. Look at Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom starts a podcast. He starts talking to conservatives. He has Steve Bannon and Charlie Kirk and Michael Savage on, and it's super compelling content. He goes down the polls. People don't like when he talks to the other side. And then he starts having left-wingers on. No one cares about his podcast anymore, but he goes up in the polls for who's going to win in 2028. And that's exactly how it works out here, is that if you try to do anything reasonable in terms of normal Americans, conservatives, et cetera, that's bad. But if you toe the line, left-wing party line, you can get away with literally ripping off the taxpayers. And it's very depressing, to be honest with you.
So in the last few weeks, we had Steve Hilton on, one of the conservatives running for governor, Fox News personality, great guy. What do you think the state of play is in the California governor's race? I mean, is this that moment between the fires, the corruption scandals, all of this stuff that's going on in California where people have had enough, or is it an insurmountable machine at this point?
It's insurmountable, but it doesn't mean we can't try, because you got to get momentum. I'm very committed to fighting the good fight, but it is the Republicans and conservatives are not sufficiently fired up in off-year elections. And part of it's for what I stated, Don, and that the left considers a politics above all else. We would prefer to live as individuals, to show up and vote once every 2 years, once every 4 years, and then go back to our families and our jobs and building things and trying to live a noble life. And we're not sitting around trying to think about politics all the time.
Yeah.
The left-wing political machine is politics all day, every day. They're out there protesting who knows what this weekend in my neighborhood, and my neighborhood sort of leans conservative. They're fired up all the time. And until we can match that energy, then we're going to have a really hard time winning in areas that are stacked against us and winning in off-year elections. And this is a call to arms. Your audience, super engaged people, we need to get more activist in our approach, or I'm going to be given bad news from places like California.
Yeah, no, I mean, we saw that, and you're 100% right. I mean, Trump won in a landslide victory in November a year ago, and 2 months later in January there was a special election for the Supreme that basically decided the control of the Supreme Court in Wisconsin which will decide on redistricting and these kinds of things. And you can win by a few points there, and no one shows up for the special election on our side. I mean, it's one of those like, wait a minute, we won by X number of points. Like, if those people come, we win. But they didn't even bother. They didn't even know about it. So you're right. Like, once we got what we wanted, we're like, okay, we got what we wanted. I'll see you in 4 years. Maybe some of us will see you in 2. But the rest were checked out. And you basically gave them back a state that we won in a pretty sizable victory.
Completely toxic attitude. And that is where I think that it's obviously a multifaceted approach if we're going to maintain our majorities and grow them. But it is, we got to end doomerism online. Things are going better than we could have ever anticipated if President Kamala Harris or President Biden. And we need to get people jacked up to investigate all the bad guys and then to get activated politically off your elections, being persuasive, being convincing, being cool, being culturally relevant. And if we lose sight of those things, then we are going to lose. It's just going to happen. And that's not acceptable, because what they want to do with this country is horrific. I've had a front row seat to it in California, where every single problem has gotten worse under Gavin Newsom's tenure here. Traffic's gotten worse. Airports gotten worse. Homelessness has gotten worse. Crime has gotten worse. Taxes have gone up. Half the state almost burned down with fires. There is no benefit. He doesn't have a single victory to point to unless your goal is to have more men on women's podiums in prep sports. Other than that, he's done nothing, and he's the front runner for the Democrat nominee for 2028 as of now. How could that possibly be? We should be destroying these people politically, and we're not. We're winning, I would say, overall, but it should be a blowout.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of prep schools, I mean, you went to Harvard Westlake in Los Angeles. What is the state of Los Angeles, more specifically? I mean, is there a path forward there? I mean, because if you talk about the state sort of just being, a rudderless ship, I mean, LA has got to be, the captain of that rudderless ship.
Yeah, in a way, what's interesting is that a lot of conservatives have moved out. of the state, and I understand it. And because you always think about it, it's funny. I had an interview with Victor Davis Hanson a year or two ago, and I asked him. He lives in Fresno, which is about an hour and a half north of where I live. And I asked him. I said, "Do you ever think about leaving?" And he said, "Oh, we all think about leaving." Yeah. Meaning all conservatives. And it's true. I have a conversation with my wife every other week. Like, should we get out of here? And ultimately there's a lot of great stuff here. It is, the weather's fantastic. The vacations are fantastic. The getaways, people generally run pretty happy relative to a lot of the country, at least where I am. Not in LA, everyone's very bummed out and because of all the crime and anger and angst. But it's kind of lost. It's kind of a lost place where people pursue not meaningful things, just the most flimsy of entertainment, the influencer class, where everyone's just selfieing it all the time and then going to fancy restaurants, but they're not building any wealth or anything like that. It's a very nihilistic worldview out here in LA. So I don't really know if it's salvageable anytime soon, Don, but if you want to eat and shop, it's a good place.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the point. Anyone who's, running a business or, you realize like not only can you not be there, for all the obvious reasons, you're almost like breaking your fiduciary responsibility to your investors, to your employees by staying, which is why everyone's moving to Texas or Arizona or Florida or elsewhere. I mean, if you're in California, exactly. You're mostly moving sort of, south and a little bit east towards Texas or something like that. But you see the same thing with the flight out of New York to, North Carolina, Georgia, obviously Florida. The creators are eventually they're gonna leave because they have no choice.
But let me speak to one thing that's important, because a lot of people don't understand how someone like me could live out here. And it's always been great research for me, because as being a person who's part of conservative media and on the activist conservative side of the aisle, then I really do get an insight into what the left does that's effective. That's always helped me. But a lot of it's family and network. I'm out here because of my wife's work. My wife's a cancer doctor, and her whole network was out here, and I work online, so I can be anywhere. And we have all four grandparents who are out here. So I just want people to understand that there's lots of reasons why conservatives live in blue areas. And it is, the weather was fantastic this weekend. I can play golf on Christmas Day. Like, there's a lot of great stuff about this state. There's a lot of obvious horrible stuff as well. And so I don't blame anyone who would ever leave. But I do think that it would be great to try to win states like this back. I know that you probably feel similarly about New York. Like, it would be great if we could win back New York one day. So it's just good to think about, let's not give up on everything. Obviously, I know a lot of people look at me and think I must be an idiot for being in California, but it's not quite that bad, because if you look at the network and the family, then we want to make it so that America is livable anywhere. Like, we don't want to make it so that, other than, I guess, like Berkeley or something. I mean, we want it to be that you should be able to have a decent life, and you should be entitled to law and order, which we're not in LA. Like, we don't treat law and order like it matters. That's crazy. And we should care.
I mean, Breitbart was born in West LA, if I remember correctly. I mean, when you think back to those moments, what really stands out?
Yeah, exactly. Andrew and I were from similar areas and from West LA, and I think we had the same worldview, that we could understand the power of the culture. And Andrew was the first one to preach that culture was upstream of politics, which is something that everyone on the right agrees with this now, Don. And we all think we came up with it ourselves. We all think that of course, culture is way more important. And look, the reality TV stars, the president, of course. No one knew that. No one was saying that. Andrew was the only one who was saying that 15 years ago. And I'd grown up in West LA, as you mentioned, and I went to school in Hollywood, and I went to school at Berkeley. And I got to see, how could the left, with these hideous people, these horrible ideas, how come they're winning? And you start seeing it's because of the messaging. Their messaging machine was so much better. And that was a real education. And you could arrive at conservative viewpoints, but understand that we were still losing unless we reset the messaging machine. And that's what we've done over the last decade plus, with Donald Trump being the most important figure in this. But it's really been a big collective effort on the media front, and how we learned to meme better, and how we got hotter than they are. And it's like, and we got funnier, and all of that was part of a grand design that started to take shape, starting with Andrew Breitbart. And if he grew up in a normal part of flyover country, then he would never have learned all that. But he was a music journalist, and he would deliver scripts in town, and he was on the periphery of Hollywood. His father-in-law, Orson Bean, is the Hollywood legend. And that's where he understood the tactics the left was using, and that's where they were winning. And that's what he imbued in us at Breitbart. But I think we were able to successfully transfer that to really the entire movement.
I guess on a personal note, what really keeps you motivated to keep writing, keep doing all this work around the clock, especially, where you're at with everything you have to get through?
Thank you for asking that. It's a really fun to answer that one. The two things is I hate the left. I really do. And there's a lot of
hate is a powerful motivator. I mean, love and hate become basically the same thing at a certain point in terms of motivation.
Yeah, exactly. And it's there's infighting on the right now, and I have takes on all that, and it's all nuanced though. But what I hate is the left. Like that's when I wake up in the morning, I hate what they do to this country. I hate that they hate freedom. I hate they want to confiscate more of my money. I hate that they want to keep the borders open. I hate that they think illegal aliens are more important than my children. I hate all that stuff. And I hate the establishment. I hate the forever wars. And I hate that they think they're entitled to more of our money to send the defense industry and all that stuff. And it's like, I just hate all that stuff. And so I want to defeat all that. But I play a realist. Anyone who listens to my podcast and sees our commentary, Breitbart, I kind of play a realist, but in my heart, I'm an optimist. I have a bunch of children, as you do, Don, and I really, believe it or not, think America's best days are in front of us, even though a lot of the evidence suggests that's not true. I still believe it in my heart. Like I really do think those days can happen. And so that's what I'm doing, is that I think that the harder we work now, the better chance for my children will have a better life than I do. And I think that's very possible. And I think people who have given up on that, I think are really being a little lazy mentally.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I can assure you it was a lot easier being a real estate developer from New York City and shutting my mouth and just going along with it, even if I was a conservative. But that's not a country I want to leave to my children. And so that's sort of why I do this at this point. But in that last answer, you brought up sort of an important word that I think is definitely missing, which was nuance. We've seen so much of that. I mean, I saw so much of that, in the wake of, Charlie Kirk's passing. I know you, along with me, and I guess, Jack Poso and, Benny, we're like the four people sort of, sanctioned by Erica and TPUSA to like literally speak on his behalf because we knew him so well. But, immediately, online you saw Charlie was 100 billion% pro-Israel, or Charlie Kirk had 100% turned against Israel. It's like, well, you can actually be 100% pro-Israel, but not necessarily have to agree with 100% of the government that rules it. And like, there is nuance, but online you only saw binary options. You were either 100% in or you were 100% out. And that was bullshit. People's minds can change, people's thoughts. Certainly, and I'm sure you had these same conversations with Charlie could evolve, and you could have been much more pro something a few years ago and go against it. Doesn't mean you're not against. It doesn't mean you're against the idea generally, but you could say, well, I don't necessarily love everything that's going on in the ruling party of a country. That doesn't mean I've changed my support on Israel. A country isn't necessarily its current government, and so the nuance thing is something that feels like it's missing, especially online, where again, it does feel like, the most vocal, people out there are, either, very clearly on a payroll, or, the nuance doesn't generate the clicks does, like that the extreme takes on either side do.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think Charlie, who I spoke to about Israel basically on a daily basis, because he's someone who he relied on my takes on that. I'm proud to say, and he was overall a pro-Israel person, but he was deeply critical of the way they managed their PR, and he certainly thought they were total disasters when it came to messaging, and he thought that compromised him to some degree because he felt like he was doing their job for them on campuses where he was getting peppered with questions about Israel. And he was kind of thinking, like, why am I the one I didn't appoint myself to be spokesman for Israel. And I think that's really meaningful, that as someone who liked Israel, I think that's meaningful that he had that critique. And I think he genuinely was someone who wanted to keep Americans out of wars. Yeah. And I think he had a concern that if we were going to get into a major world war, I think if you would have asked him, he would have thought we're not going to. But I think that he didn't absolutely want to make sure that there's no new wars because were fighting on Israel's behalf. And I think that that's all very reasonable. Like, I don't think
that was my point. When I would see online, it's like, no way, he would have gone to war and everyone would have died in a nuclear explosion. I'm like, I don't know. It's not the guy I knew. I don't think most of the people speaking online knew him better than I did. I probably spoke to him every day for a decade, and then some. But to me, it was amazing that the idea that there may be nuance, that there may be a path down the middle, and that's just totally just forgotten about, is wild, because I think that's probably where the vast majority of people sit. Again, you may be left or right in the off center, but the extreme ends probably doesn't represent the vast majority of anyone.
It's also totally uninteresting, and I know you spend a lot of time in this world as I do, Don, and it's so boring to have the black and white take. I mean, it's way more interesting to actually have a real conversation about it. But Charlie also, he had remarkable political instincts. Yeah. And again, he was a pro-Israel person overall.
Yes.
But he knew his audience. And he knew if there was any war that Donald Trump was involved in or started or peripherally involved in, that involved Israel and Americans lost lives, that would be completely devastating to Donald Trump's coalition. Yeah. And he was making that message clear without openly saying that, like flat out, this is a real thing. But he knew that. And of course, he's right about that. Yeah. And so I say this as someone who loves Israel and would love for Israel to succeed and to be around. And I say that just so you understand where I'm coming from on this.
Yeah, by the way, I agree with you 100%.
But if we go to a war and it's perceived in the public as on Israel's behalf, then there really is a major threat to MAGA. And I think Charlie was aware of that. And I think it's a shame that he can't speak for himself. It just is among all the things. And we as a conservative movement, we cannot get suckered into getting divided because of this, because then the terrorists win. And it's just so important to understand this, is that Charlie was a uniter in this movement, other than your father, the number one uniter that we've got. And I just think that's important that we consider that when we're having these discussions.
Alex, as we look to the end of the year and beyond, what are some of the other big stories that you're keeping your eye on? I mean, you guys at Breitbart, you've certainly been all over that for the last decade. You guys get it. It was great watching sort of, some of the mainstream media, watch Matt Boyle, interview JD Vance at there. I mean, you've I don't want to say you've come a long way. I think you've always been there, but I think you're actually getting some of that recognition, as being thought leaders. What are some of the stories out there that you see sort of brewing that perhaps we're not paying attention to yet?
Yeah, it was really interesting because we had this great event with JD in Washington a couple of weeks ago. And we got all these big corporate sponsors who wouldn't have touched us with a 10-foot pole 8 years ago for no good reason, just because the left bullied them, pressured them that you wouldn't want to have your brands associated with extremely popular MAGA media because we're MAGA. And and then now that era is over, I just thank God. And because it helps our country, it helps our country if people are understanding that the millions upon millions of people who consume our content every day are real, vital Americans, and they vote and they make money and they have businesses and they deserve to be spoken to. And we're by far the most accurate outlet on the internet because our standards we get policed by everyone. So anytime we make a mistake.
Yeah, you have no choice, right? When the other guys get it wrong, no one's going to pounce. You get it wrong and literally everyone will pounce.
Yeah, thank you. And you've been such a booster of us, Don. It means the world to us. And I share with the team every time you say something nice. So thank you. But it's not just, it's our audience. It's our audience runs skeptical. So if we make a mistake, they'll tell us. And then the establishment media, and then we're high integrity people anyway. So it just feels great. But I'll tell you that the midterms are huge because we have a binary here. Yeah. We have President Trump is able to spend the last 2 years of his administration governing or fending off impeachment baloney. And if you think that is preferable and you're unhappy with certain parts of whatever the agenda is and what got prioritized, what and when, I understand. I've been there. I wanted your dad to put immigration first in the first term. Healthcare came first. It didn't work out. I didn't like that. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You got to be grown-ups. You got to be adults here. We can't give the country.
Yeah, it's like business. You don't get everything that you want. I mean, you got to take those incremental gains. And that's what the left is really good about. They're like, well, we got 51% of what we want. We're going forward. We're not, we'll have 99% of what we need and someone will blow it because, about the 1% that no one cares about.
That said, I would love to give all the various elements of the coalition something they want. Try to undo the Epstein mess up, which was obviously the worst part of the administration so far, the way that was rolled out. It'd be great to get some new investigations going, get people held accountable. I think the base would love that. But the affordability messaging is real also, because things are going simultaneously better than people are seeing, with potential on the way for things, which is, here's the point. This is partially the fact that the fake news media are liars, but we have to fight through that noise, and we need to chart out a narrative about what's going on, and where things are not going well, we need to start correcting it. If we feel like inflation is still too high, if we feel like housing prices are too high, steps need to be taken in order to try to get those reined in the next year. And so if we answer on the affordability issue and get people fired up, I think 2026 is going to be an amazing year. And if not, then we could be in a march towards something that could be pretty dark, because we don't want to waste the last 2 years of Trump's administration, unless we can somehow pull off away for another 4 years, which I'm open-minded, but I haven't seen it yet.
You never know. You never know. But hey, Alex, thank you very much. Everyone go check out Alex Marlow's book, Breaking the Law. Follow Breitbart News. Just a great source of stuff. Share that kind of stuff with your friends. Alex, great to see you again, as always. And I'm sure we'll be talking again in the not too distant future.
Can't wait. Thanks, Don.
Be well, buddy. Guys, thanks so much for tuning in. Remember to like, to share, to subscribe. Check out our sponsors down below and in the video description. It's really important. If you missed the show here on Rumble, check us out on Apple, on Spotify. If your friends get their podcast that way, make sure they know to subscribe. Make sure they know to share. Before you leave, hit that like button. It's that easy, okay? Check out the sponsors, hit the like button,